we put up JP on stage. Welcome from Canada. Really appreciate to have you tonight.
Hey,
Let me
thank you.
put up my slides, and then the stage is yours.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you, Stefan, for the opportunity to talk. Yeah, long-time lurker for Bevy Meetups, first-time talker. So, yeah, this is cool. A lot of fun. Thanks, Tristan. Also, that talk was really awesome. I saw a lot of parallels, actually, in our experiences. So, give me some reassurance that we're going down the right track here. Okay, let's go. In keeping with the theme tonight, I think I might be pressed for time, so we'll try and make it a little quick. This talk is basically about another viewpoint sort of based talk, a bit experiential talk, us coming to the Bevy ecosystem, pushing our commercial product through in a very short time span. So I hope that maybe this talk is useful to those who are considering Bevy, those who might spin up a new team or who might transition from an existing game dev team over to Bevy. To give you a sense, quick introduction for Bloom and myself. My name is JP. Obviously, I'm the tech director at Bloom Digital. We're a small Canadian game studio founded by Miriam Verberg over a decade ago, I want to say. We tend to make small visual novels, and they are usually targeted at sort of underserved markets. So the titles that we have launched are Long Story, which is sort of like a middle school coming of age kind of dating lifestyle sim. Later Daters, which is for retirement community living, so kind of opposite ends of the demographic spectrum there. And then we just dropped a slightly bigger game with Disney called Curse Cafe, which I'll get more to in a second. As for myself, what's like more relevant to this talk and my programming experience, I started learning C++ in high school. I was actually living in the States at the time and did computer science back when they taught C++ in high school. And so I started there. And then when I went to actually go work in software, I started with ActionScript and Flash and HTML and CSS, because that's where I got hired. So I learned to make games in Flex Builder with ActionScript. And kind of got hired from there at what was then called Synchro, is now called Sega Mini. Did a bunch of work there. That studio transitioned over into Unity and C#, so I went with it, learned C#, and then stuck with that for, until now, pretty much. So yeah, I've done some other stuff, released a bunch of tiny games. You might have heard of me over the years, or maybe not. I don't know. I'm not super loud about what I do. But tried a little bit of stuff in Rust a few years back and went, oh, this is kind of good, and it was like, wouldn't it be cool if my job could be Rust? And so this is sort of, in a way, a bit of a story of like that kind of coming to pass. I wanted to quickly, I called this slide Banana for Scale, because I want to quickly give a sense of sort of the upper bound of what Bloom does in sort of the complexity of our games, to give you a sense of the depth and the breadth of the games we make. I know people are thinking, oh, you guys make visual novels, like you don't need a programmer for that. Some people think that, right? Some people feel that way. Sure, for certain types of visual novel experience, if you want to make something in Twine or whatever, absolutely go for it. But this was a huge undertaking, this game. And the final product was about close to 40,000 lines of C# and Unity. It's not just a visual novel. There's a little bit of potion mixing mechanics and clue discovery and things like that. So there's a lot of like database juggling and so we had to make like tools like unit tests and all that stuff. And then layered on top of that is this 100,000 lines or more, I think, of ink. And so ink, if you're not familiar, for those who don't know about ink, or if you've heard of Yarn, it's like Yarn. If you don't know about Yarn, then these are a scripting language. It's a scripting language that is basically meant to tokenize things, tokenize like a movie script almost, and just send it to you line by line. But it does have built-in capability of branching choices, of math, Boolean logic, all that stuff. It's a very capable scripting language in its own sense. Most people use it as a conversation driver in a game or something like that, and that is what it excels at. So 100,000 lines of ink is not obviously 100,000 lines of code, of programming code. But if you imagine the amount of branching and the amount of permutations and combinations of possibilities, you start to see, oh my gosh, the problem space in terms of like QA and making sure that things don't break, and that gets huge, right? So I want to make sure that that's understood, that VNs, they require quite a lot, and obviously I think a lot of people come to Bevy for performance, so they come to it for parallelism and things like that, and not necessarily the strengths that we were looking for in Bevy or needed from Bevy. Then layered on top of ink are what we call Blinky. That's why I named this talk Blinky, and you might miss it. It's a dumb name. Sorry about that. Really stupid joke, but there you go. Not the last one I'll make in this presentation, but Blinky is like our superset language of ink. So what I mean by that is, like, Inkle, the company that makes ink, has a recommendation for certain ways to format your ink and certain ways that you might, standardize. We codify that in-house, and we say, okay, the writers are going to definitely do, if they're going to call it a speaker, it's going to be in caps like this. And if there's going to be a pose associated with it, it's going to be in parentheses before a colon. And then there's like action lines, which like a disembodied narrator says, and things like that. Those are written out just as plain text. And then sort of pasted on top of that are these hashtag commands, which get tokenized and actually interpreted and parsed as its own mini scripting language. Obviously, it's a very imperative and sequential programming language, in the sense that, like, you can only tell the engine to do stuff. You don't get returns. You can't do like recursive functions or things like that, except insofar as like these affect the global game state of the engine. So you could do some tricky stuff. And we do some tricky stuff. We do a lot of tricky stuff with this, but the writing teams that we've had, and especially Heather Jackson, who's our narrative director, who's a brilliant writer and has become a pretty good programmer in her own right, have learned to use the system, and it sort of vibes with them, and so they get into it. I'm not going to get too much more into this. We did a DevCon talk on it a few years back. You can check that out, or of course I'm happy to chat more with people about it afterwards. But we want to talk about Bevy. And so, it's been, I'm 5 minutes into this presentation. I haven't said much about Bevy yet. So let's talk about Bevy. So this is our soft launch of Long Story 2. You all heard it here first. Long Story 2 is going to be in Bevy, or it's going to be a Bevy engine. We actually already have a live internal beta on Steam, which is the Bevy version of Long Story 2. And for those Bevy vets who are interested in getting a key, I think we have a few of those to give out. We would love to have people's thoughts and advice. I'm fairly new to Bevy. I've been making games for a long time, but we absolutely would love community support. So I called this a rapid team transition in the title of the talk, and just to give you a sense of how condensed this is, it's been like 3 months, if we're being generous, of like real actual development work on this port. In like 2022 or to 2024, we were working on Curse Cafe. So obviously, like, the bulk of our team, which is a small team, by the way, I think we have like 7 to 10 core staff at the most. And then, when we had the big Disney bucks, it was like maybe 20 with contractors if you really wanted to like sprawl out. But for the most part, I think, the core team is very tight, especially developers. We only had at most two developers at once. So for the most part, we were pretty busy, but we did manage to put out a Unity version of Long Story 2 as a demo in 2024 for Steam Next Fest. And then just over the December winter holiday of 2024, I had really healthy boundaries between work and vacation. And I decided, what if I just worked on a thing that was like for, making a port of our game into Bevy. And poked at it in December and ended up with something that kind of worked. Showed it to Miriam, the big boss of Bloom, in early January. And of course, over the years, a couple other things have happened and sort of to like make us less certain about our choice to stay with Unity, like things like the runtime fee and the elimination of the plus fee and all that stuff. So it kind of just worked out that the timing was great. And in the future, so we're going to release hopefully sometime in June early June is the planned initial public release on Steam of Long Story 2. That's the Bevy version of it. And beyond that, we'd like to drop an iOS version. And we would like to open source Blinky to some extent, maybe offer like a commercial support thing or something. We have to commercialize. It is the necessary evil for us to exist. So probably, those who are grizzled game dev vets in the audience are probably going, what on earth were you doing? Why did you rewrite your game in Bevy? And we have a number of reasons, and I'm not going to I'm going to run out of time if I go too much into depth here, but uncertainty around, how is Unity going to make money in the future? They already tried to pull that like retroactive runtime fee. I know they walked it back and blah, 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 but we don't trust them. We don't want like a lot of our stuff, we don't want to rely on US software if we can't, especially as a Canadian studio. I think we are a little bit like, let's bring stuff home if we can. Let's get it out of the US at the very least. And we definitely wanted to have more sitting team members access to the engine. So of course, if you're using Unity properly and you have a pro license, you need to have a pro license for every sitting member. And for a tiny team that doesn't, we don't rake in the big bucks, that $2,000-$3,000 US per year, it really starts to add up per team member that wants to sit in the pipeline. And then ultimately, Bloom as a company, like, we are a very progressive company. I think we hope to be, and we have sort of progressive ideals and values, and we want to contribute as well back to free and open source software projects like Bevy. And so speaking of, we did the thing. I have committed all of one PR to Bevy, so yay. And that was this file watcher thing. Actually, Tristan mentioned at the end of that talk, the question and answer, there was a question of a more asset focused pipeline, and that's what we did. We actually have a very asset focused pipeline. That's because we have a team that's trying to build in this one. So we needed this fix because we have multiple crates. Blinky's its own crate, and then the game is a crate, and then there's sort of the main virtual workspace that contains everything. So one of the first things I noticed as I was building this Bevy prototype was that, oh, hey, I can't seem to get File Watcher working in certain virtual workspace scenarios. So that worked. And thank you to those who helped me out with this PR. It was my first PR that I ever pushed to Bevy. So awesome community. Really love everyone that I was interacting with there. So the vision for the new engine was to have sort of Rust on the bottom and ink on the top. And I think the general way of visualizing this is that most game engines that you have this sort of runtime or the editor or combo both in the case of Unity. And it's written in a certain language. So usually C or C++, like that's the bottom layer that you generally don't have a lot of access to or a lot of reason to change, right? And then in Unity cases, you have most gameplay systems and things like that get implemented in C#. And then C# and Unity can do kind of some weird stuff where it can kind of reach into the rendering pipeline and tweak stuff about the engine. And, so you have an API there that kind of drives the C++ and then for Ink, you have an Ink C# runtime that Inkle distributes. That's open source, by the way, free and open source. So shout out to Inkle as well. Sorry to them. If I didn't mention that when the Ink slide was up, they're also free and open source. So awesome piece of software there. But yeah, so the Ink runtime runs in C#, and it generally is interpreting, the Ink line by line, and then that drives the C#, and then that drives the engine underneath. So we wanted conceptually something a little bit simpler, a little bit cleaner. And when you look at it like this, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Just have like the Rust bit is the engine, and then the Ink is the top part. So we scoped it out. We were like, okay, we need a little bit of an editor-like system. We need some elements of Unity's editor system in the sense that we need to be able to inspect things. We need to be able, I think Tristan mentioned this as well. So a lot of parallel experiences here, but need to be able to look at, what does the engine think this particular node component has on it or whatever. And so we ended up building that out for the UX team. Our UX dev, Kiana Almario, who's really awesome. She did a great job of learning the system really fast, like within a couple weeks, like learned how to manipulate the new file system that we were setting up for this type of asset, and started to iterate on that. It was incredible how fast that came together. And then we wanted to empower the ink scripting to do more of what we used to do in C#, and to have that clean divide. And I think this is unusual. I think a lot of people do build a Rust game engine now, and they build it and they stick a scripting engine on top. But I think that there's also this like tendency to want to put a lot of gameplay code into the Rust right now. I think Bevy encourages that. And I think we are going to try our best to pull away from that. We're going to try our best to make sure that we can put stuff like even like menus and whatever. So what you see here is on the left, this is one of the like setup screens for your character when you're starting a new game. And on the right, that's the corresponding ink that actually runs that scene. It sets up some variables that are going to be tracked for the rest of the game. And the actual like buttons that you can click on in the UI are directly triggering dialogue options in the ink. So it's a weird way to conceptualize a menu, but it works very well for us. We also ended up, so I tried Bevy Inspector eGUI. So our editor layer is eGUI, everything else is Bevy UI. So we tried briefly to use like the out of the box crates out there. But you know, when you're working fast, sometimes it takes as long to learn something as it does to roll your own, especially if you're like a dev with, you know, a couple decades of experience, and you're like, I know how to like think about this, and I don't know how this crate wants me to do it, and I don't understand why the crate wants me to do it that way until I make it myself and make the same mistakes or whatever. So hard lessons learned, but yeah. So you can see that there's a bit of live editing possible. What it does is it looks at components, and it abuses the reflect trait to dump it into JSON. And then this like inspector here is just glorified JSON editor inspector. And then it marks a field as dirty. And then the engine goes, oh, hey, okay, that's dirty. Let me update the component appropriately. And so there's some live editing, and we can in fact open and save different scenes. And so that we kind of have, you know, it's sort of like an editor. So yeah, I mean, I alluded to this earlier, but this idea of like, why Rust, why Bevy? You know, we're making a visual novel. We don't need performance. We don't need parallelization. We don't need an ECS. That's not super necessary. But some big things that really drew me to Rust were the stability. Like, it's hard to write code that is fundamentally bad in Rust. It does a lot of the, you know, prevents you from making a lot of the dumb mistakes that I have made in C# or in C or in whatever. And the portability. Within an hour or two, we had, you know, Heather was able to get cargo run going on her Mac, and she just, boom, up comes the project. That was wild to have that be so much easier even than, and I probably will get some enemies for this, but easier even than installing Unity and running a project that way. So that was really, really cool. Bevy, honestly, we were not looking at Bevy, or I wasn't thinking Bevy was a lock. I had played with Bevy back in 0.12. And when I came back to it, I was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of nice. I did try, I'm not going to lie, I tried multiple times to not use Bevy. I tried to use WGPU at its lowest level. I tried to set up like an SDL type thing. And I went, you know what? Bevy has done this. And I mean, again, kudos to the Bevy team and community. Bevy has done so much of the heavy lifting and has done such an amazing job of making sure that even things like windowing, rendering, all that stuff, device input, all that is incredibly well handled. So why reinvent the wheel? And I like the concept of an ECS. I do, even though I'm not great at it. And more on that in a second. And then why port an existing game and not create a new game from scratch? I think a lot of people might be like, well, you're wasting effort. Why are you remaking a game that exists for the most part? And the answer is that like that well-defined problem space is probably the ideal way to tackle this problem of like, okay, we're going to jump into something very unknown. I'm going to learn some new technology and we're going to learn on the spot. We're going to build something, but at least we know what the shape the product at the end takes. So the problem space resides in like, how does this work for us, and how do we structure Bevy so that it works for us? And it's not also at the same time, how do we build a game? How do we make a game fun, or how do we build this content out, and et cetera? I'm going to skip this because I'm running out of time. So, and I've talked mostly about this. I mean, Ink is a very sequential and iterative language that it's got its own inherent challenges in making it like control interactivity. Rust, yeah, I do happen to be an idiot on this particular subject. Lots have been said about Rust, about people much smarter than myself in terms of its suitability for games. And I think I agree with a lot of what's been said in terms of Rust's immutability or resistance to change, in terms of once you've programmed something, it doesn't, making fluid changes requires a level of skill in Rust that I don't think a lot of people have. And it's a lot harder than in a gaming script like C# or Lua or something like that, where you are able to kind of just like do absolutely curse things and be like, yeah, I'm going to just quickly transform.find this menu widget and I'm going to turn it off because I just want to see how that looks. I want to see how that runs. And certainly if you are a programmer like myself who comes to Rust after, you know, nearly 20 years of programming, and you're saying, okay, well, I've read the Rust programming book, I've done Rustlings, I've written a few like small projects, some for like Raspberry Pi Pico. So I did some embedded work in Rust, and I've done some like open source work in Rust for whatever emulation for 6502 stuff. I did a bunch of like little mini projects. I was like, okay, I get Rust. I understand it. No, not at all. There's incredible things that even Bevy does with macros. And I think that that's just like so hard to overstate how much that can change the shape of what you think you know about Rust. And the same thing with all the great crates that exist out there. I like, once you know Rust, you don't know Rust. You know sort of syntax, and you don't really know why all these crates exist, like Serday and stuff, that have these very opinionated, idiomatic ways of using them. And you're going to hit a bunch of walls thinking that you know what you're doing. Sorry, too long on that slide. Let's keep going. So same thing, ECS. I think a lot of Unity programmers who come to Bevy are going to hit this. I think a lot of Bevy people who have Unity experience are going to go, I know ECS. I do game objects. I stick components on them. And I write a component script and I attach it to a game object. And every game object I attach it to, that's a system basically, right? And like, yes, but no, not at all. Like the amount that Bevy and Rust makes you think ahead of time about like, okay, what are my dependencies and how much are my scripts allowed to like affect each other and crosstalk. I had a lot of the same issues that Tristan did in terms of like, everything's an event. Wait, no, there's a 1-frame delay. Wait, ordering of systems, all that stuff really comes and gets you. And I think, you know, Bevy has the tagline, I think, of refreshingly simple game engine. It's like chess, easy to learn, hard to master, right? Like it's, I think, very, very challenging to understand why you're doing things the way you're doing. And certainly one of the things that I wrestle with a lot is this sort of code smell of like, why is my function signature like 800 things? So this is the function signature for our main parsing function that kind of basically takes an Ink, you know, one of our Blinky commands. And once it parses it, it has to have access to like, you know, a Blinky command can do a bunch of different stuff. So what do? We have access to like 20 different event writers. Okay, sure. Also, the Bevy's really smart about parallelization. And so stuff isn't thread safe. So you can't just send closures around. So you can't, you know, so that led to this issue, which is that I got kind of a foot gunned by trying to use Blade Ink, which awesome crate written by Rafael Garcia. Don't know them, but it's fantastic. It's a feature parity with the official Ink C# runtime. This was my first experience with like, okay, how do I like non-send resource, and how does that affect actually like parallelization and stuff like that? Even though that's something that's not like relevant to our game. And I do think that something that Bevy should have is possibly a less aggressively parallelized version, something that allows more explicit ordering of systems, something that allows like all the things that Tristan mentioned, because realistically, I think most people are not going to run into performance issues with Bevy based on just that. Might get some pitchforks for that, but especially in our case, that was the case. But so our final solution here was to be, or not final, but the current solution was to be like, okay, the non-send resource loads up and says like, do I have a story object? If I don't, check to see if I have an ink asset. And if I don't, then reload that. And if I, so, and this also was something that we needed because, as I mentioned before, with the file watcher stuff, the writers will save an ink file. They'll write over the ink JSON, and that will immediately trigger the game to reload. Super awesome feature. Yeah, and so that helps for that. But like getting this structure set up was surprisingly more difficult than it seems. Okay, really running out of time here, so I'm going to be real quick. Scene management, can't wait for BSN. So wrote our own with advice from the UX dev I mentioned earlier, Kiana, and so basically tried to make something that was ergonomic for them. I did see some of the examples of Rusty object notation. Just too verbose, I think, and too non-specific, hard to parse. And we tried to make a scene exporter from Unity, but the anchor system is too different. The editor thing, I think we've all hacked this to death. So yeah, I thought this was really clever when I finally came up with this to like take the reflect thing and do the whole JSON thing. We'll move on from that. Obviously, Bevy, Inspector, eGUI, and like things exist, and lots of great efforts exist. But like I said, learning takes a long time versus rolling your own to have something that ready in production in like a few days. And then lastly, just like misunderstandings from my side about how like the node system works. So obviously we work a lot in 2D, and a lot of our game is UI and UX work. Things I thought would work would be like, oh, is reflect on every single Bevy component? No. So I was like, oh, well, why doesn't everybody just use, reflect everything and then serialize everything and then spit it back out? Yeah, that was a rabbit hole I chased for a few days. That was not a good use of my time. I definitely got a little bit confused about like putting Bevy UI up and spawning multiple windows, because originally I was going to have like a multiple window setup for the editor. I never managed to get the debug outlines working. I know that there was like this feature, and I think maybe the way that I was doing like this like check for dirty properties, I think I was blowing up the outlines maybe from that feature. Last thing, actually this one is important. I think there are behavioral differences from how Bevy UI sort of defines itself. It looks a lot like HTML and CSS. It looks a lot like, padding, margin, position absolute, all this stuff. But there's just behavioral differences between it and actual HTML and CSS. And I think that maybe they should be addressed. Maybe they should be cleaned up. I don't know. Maybe it's too late. But simple things like if I put padding on a node and I put text on the same node, in HTML and CSS, I expect the text to be affected by the padding. But that is not the case as far as I've seen in Bevy so far. Again, limited time to experiment. But from what I've seen, the text, if you put it in a child node, yes, it respects it, but otherwise it just kind of blows out. Okay, sorry, went way over time there. So I think so. We're done. That's it. Thank you, everybody. If you got more questions or want to talk more after this show, I think we're gonna have a panel thing right now, or if there's time. But there's my contacts. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you all for being here. That's it. That's all.
Hey, thanks, JP. Super
Thank you.
interesting. That's some nice insights there. I didn't look into this text padding thing. That's curious, but yeah, it might be a design limitation by the node defining the padding, and then the text actually being like a sibling of that and not a child of it, right?
Yeah.
But it's worth looking into, I guess. So yeah, we have a bunch of questions. Let me start.
Oh gosh.
No, it's not that bad. and also I think some you already answered probably down the line. Let's see. So you referred to something in the beginning as a virtual workspace. Maybe you can elaborate what that is.
Yeah, so the terminology there is hard to. I don't know. It's a Rust thing. So basically, it's when you have a Rust folder containing multiple crates, and you just go ahead and hit cargo run, and Rust just goes, okay, every crate that isn't a binary is a library, and they're assumed to be the same, like associated projects. So the way that we have it is Blinky's a crate, and the game itself is Blinky's like a library crate, and the game itself is a binary crate. And so the issue with that was when you run cargo run, I think this is talking about the file watcher issue that I noticed way back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. When you and this is fixed, obviously it was merged, but when you ran cargo run from that root, the file watcher would get confused and try and look in that root folder, whereas the assets were expected to live in alongside the binary. So they'd be in a subfolder from where you're running cargo run from.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was one of the first things that I really tackled in Bevy. I was like, what? Why doesn't this work? Maybe I misunderstand it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, interesting. I've never seen a project set up like that, so that's probably why this wasn't working in the beginning.
The plan is
not the most usual setup, I guess.
Yeah, the plan is long term, right? To have Blinky be its own product and to have that split out. So it is completely. You could pull it out and move it into another game, or we might open source it by itself, right?
Yeah. That's very exciting to hear. Actually, that might be an option. I'm gonna keep chasing you up on that. Okay, virtual workspace. Does it save the live edited JSON from to disk? I guess is the question.
Yes. So so that was another interesting Bevy dead end that I went down, which was asset saving. And I did learn that there is sort of an asset saver thing, or at the time, I don't know, this was like late 0.14 and early 0.15. That like asset saver doesn't really work to like take that writer and then immediately write back over. So I did write a thing that, it takes the JSON of the scene and it does blow it out. And then that triggers the file watcher, which kind of goes, oh, hey, this changed, and it forces a reload. So it's pretty neat.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So it's actually not changing, like you don't do the change in code. You basically rely on the file watcher that triggers a reload and then changes the visualization of the scene.
We do both, and it's redundant.
Okay.
Yeah, it's redundant, but but it's kind of necessary. The other thing that is challenging, so there's kind of like a double-edged sword about that whole like serialize to JSON and come back, which is obviously if you go to JSON, you don't have type information, like strict type information. You know, this was a number, or this was a string, or this was a Boolean. Like that's pretty much it. So there's stuff in Rust, obviously, where something that it looks like a string in JSON is actually an enum. And so when you come back, the JSON will be like, no, not a valid number. So what it does do is when it live reconverts back into the component, if it's incorrect, it will just hold on to the JSON as in the dirty format and just say, no, this isn't valid. Keep trying. And then once it hits a valid state, that's when it instant saves.
But how does that happen? If you programmatically serialize a valid type into JSON and then save it, how can it come back being undeserializable?
Because you can type anything into that field, right? So it's an GUI field.
Okay.
So you can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But then, let's not go there. Maybe in the panel.
Sorry, it's a rabbit hole. Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's an interesting one. Is portability to consoles a concern for you?
Yes. Straight up, yes. I know I've had conversations with various people who have talked about like maybe there is like secret work on Switch portability and maybe not. And I know that there was that really cool Game Boy Advance push from, I think it was a Bushrat, I think was the username. Really cool stuff, but I obviously pushing to something like Switch and Xbox is a concern. I will say, we would like to be on those platforms, and certainly we're hoping to get like some kind of funding, whether that's government or otherwise, to have time to work on that, or to hire somebody from the Bevy community to work on that. We have released games on Switch and Xbox and PlayStation 5. The Disney one is on all those platforms. So yeah, it's a concern. Is it like deal breaker? No. The bulk of our money is iOS and desktop, I think.
Oh, so this is going to go on iOS.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yep. That's an interesting topic. Gonna
Yeah.
catch you later on that one. Okay. Next one. How does the rewrite compare in iteration times for you to Unity, I guess?
Oh, interesting. Like compile times, I'm assuming that means, or so
Yeah, I guess like
obviously,
end to end from a change to see the difference on your app.
yeah. Some things are a lot faster, right? So the stuff that that we've got File Watcher looking for. So like the fact that we're moving a lot of stuff into ink means that we are pretty much ready the second that the ink is ready. So Inkle provides Inky, which is an IDE for the ink scripting language. Could they name it any more confusing? I don't know, but yeah. So when you export from that, you get a precompiled JSON, and basically the second that hits the file, the assets folder of our game, the game recognizes, okay, I've got to reload the whole story. So that's instant, or as close to instant as practical. Rust's changes obviously are significant, and boy, oh boy, did I not know, like when I was first playing with Bevy and Rust, like the dynamic linking feature, I was like, how do people tolerate this? Because I would I would make a small change and it would be like a 2-minute recompile, and I'm like, what's going on? So yeah, I feel like that's something that like really Bevy should push as mandatory for anybody who's coming from any other environment, to have even like remotely reasonable compile times, is that dynamic linking feature. But once the dynamic linking feature was in there, I really feel like it's pretty quick still. Like it's maybe 30 seconds of compile time still for me. And yeah,
but is that different? Like when you say that it's pretty instant with the ink specific changes, is that different in the Unity version?
Yes, only because the way we built the Unity engine. So this was a sort of, I know I blew through this part of the presentation, but the way we had structured the Unity engine, ink has to be sort of an embedded asset. And so it takes the JSON and it stuffs it in. So then the C# has to recompile to be like, oh, you have a new embedded asset. So the whole, you go through, like if you ever stop and start a complex project in Unity, you're sitting there for like a minute or two, at least. So it's faster. I would say this is much faster.
Yeah. But it's also not entirely impossible for you to potentially reload that in runtime as well.
Not at all. Yeah, and that was a structural mistake, really, in the Unity side of things. But at a certain point, there's enough of those structural mistakes, because there's things which are easy to do in Unity, right? Where you're like, I'm just going to change. I'm going to drag and drop this into a field in Unity, and I'm going to change this thing. And so, from a user like ergonomics standpoint, very fast, very easy. And that overrides sort of the sensibility of like, but what if I need to make rapid changes to this a lot in the future? That problem comes later. And who knows? I mean, this approach might implode at some other point, but it seems a lot better.
Yeah. No, that's true. Okay. Cool. Last question. So, have you tried Bevy with the single threading feature? Does that drop the send requirements? I don't even know about the single threading feature.
That's news to me.
I think there's a multi-threading feature, but no, I'm pretty sure there's a way to, like, I think there's a default feature for multi-threading. So maybe dropping that could be interesting. Although I'm not sure if that changes anything about the send requirements, to be fair.
I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't.
That's super cool.
Didn't come up, right?
Yeah, I will say, like, a lot of stuff that I heard from Tristan's talk in terms of like events and observers and triggers was long-term more problematic, and mirrored my experience, in terms of like the 1 frame delay and stuff like that, and system ordering was way more complex than this one thing around the ink, the blade ink crate, and it being non-send and everything. I guess one caveat to that is something that we used a lot in C# were closures and Lambda functions and things like that, to be like, hey, I don't want this big chunk of code here. I'm going to inject this, like, callback or whatever, and it's going to get passed along to these different systems. And so they can sort of self-encapsulate, and it kind of looks like it's cleaner than it is.
Yeah.
So yeah. And you can't do that easily in Bevy because as soon as you make a function, I think most functions aren't send safe. I don't know. I had trouble. Again, I'm a professional idiot in Rust, so that could just be my problem.